Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast, bringing you the latest in sports news, fantasy analysis, and opinions. Don't forget the hot takes. Can't have a sports show without hot takes these days. What about hot cakes, though? I want some hot cakes. Now, here's your host, ready to jump into the thick of things, Dwayne Callender.
Good morning and welcome to the show. Quite a bit happened yesterday. We had some NFL playoff action, some duds of matchups for the most part, but all I can say is, am I glad I did not play NBA DFS last night because it would have been ugly. Mainly because the Golden State Warriors and the Sacramento Kings managed to break the slate with just a ridiculous game of basketball last night that I only managed to catch the highlights of, but basically the Warriors won 127-123 in a game that broke the NBA record for three-pointers with 41. 41 three-pointers made. Let me just sink that in for you folks. 41 three-pointers. Most NBA games, even with the shooting increase, most NBA games has less than 25 three-pointers made. So 41 is just getting ridiculous levels of just chucking it up there. It was the first time ever that both teams in a game made 23s. The Kings made a franchise record 23 pointers. Steph Curry had 10 3-pointers en route to a 40-point game. Buddy Hield had 8 3-pointers, which was made it the first time in an NBA game two players made more than 8 threes. Again, it is a crazy game that happened last night in the NBA. And, it's just a blip on the radar screen for the most part. I mean, with teams shooting three-pointers at this high a clip, the DFS websites are actually going to have to start thinking about some of the metrics used to score games. Because, if you didn't have exposure to the Warriors and Kings, you were done last night. You were absolutely done, dead in the water. Don't even bother playing because you just contributed to the overlay and the contest that you paid up for. There's no getting around it. With that many three-pointers hit, I mean, you're toast. And honestly, it's just to an absurd level. I mean, 23 pointers between two squads. I mean, oh man, just incredible times we're living in the NBA. It's scary because no one can play a lick of defense. Because you can't even touch someone. Because I saw the clip of James Harden somehow getting 3 free throws when he was not actually contacted by a defender and flopped when his own man brushed against him, and the referee still gave continuation on a shot after Harden had already put up the shot. Again, I can't with NBA refs right now. It's just getting to a point of absurdity that, is better left for another day. But let's get into it with the NFL action yesterday. Just a mess of an opening game once again because it's the Houston Texans who are clearly in need of a new head coach because Bill O'Brien will never get them there. The Texans fall to the Indianapolis Colts 21-7, and that 7 was on what amounted to garbage time because the Texans still were without points in the fourth quarter. But just to kind of give a rundown of how fraudulent this Texans team is because of their schedule. 13 of the 16 regular season games that the Texans were involved in featured these quarterbacks: Brock Osweiler, Blaine Gabbert, Blake Bortles, Cody Kessler, Marcus Mariota, Colt McCoy, Alex Smith, Case Keenum, the Peanut Man, Dak Prescott, Eli Manning, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Nick Foles, and, it's just, you run down the list. There's a reason why this Texans team made the playoffs. That is one of the weakest schedules you will ever see in NFL history. And yet still, folks were surprised that the Texans being a home favorite, were shut out at halftime 21-0. The only thing that was surprising to me was the fact that the Texans couldn't figure out how to attack a Tampa 2 defense. The play calling is atrocious. Deshaun Watson is basically having to make stuff up on the fly and just scramble out of situations. It's embarrassing for a team to be so unprepared for their opponent. And again, it's a division game. You play this team 2 times a year. This is your 3rd time playing them. Each time you played the Colts, the Texans managed to get worse on offense. That's coaching. Like, the Colts had the Texans figured out, and the Texans never adjusted. I don't know what else you could say to that, but you need a new head coach. But, again, Bill O'Brien manages to escape that much criticism because people just point to saying, oh, look how many games he won. He can't actually adjust to anything else that's going on. So when people make up this nonsense about Mike Tomlin not knowing X's and O's, I want them to show me where some of these other coaches know what the hell they're talking about, because I see teams all the time that can't manage their way out of a paper bag, and it's constant with the Texans. I've been railing on Bill O'Brien for years now about how unqualified he is to be an NFL head coach and no media attention. So that's how more often than not, that a lot of the media coverage that happens for some of these teams is very scripted, because, again, there's an agenda being pushed and a narrative being pushed by some folks that want to get certain messages out there. But if we're being perfectly honest with ourselves here, that Colts team is not very good. They're really not. I mean, the Chiefs losing that game next week is going to be on Andy Reid, because the Chiefs, by all accounts, should have been able to at least glean a few things from watching the Colts this year, because they are terrible against tight ends, which Houston apparently did not get the memo on because they ran no actual plays for their individual tight ends. The Chiefs still have Travis Kelce, who's the best catching tight end in the league. And, not for nothing, as bad as the Chiefs' defense is, the Colts are a good pass blocking team. They have improved as a run blocking team this year. But the biggest thing is that the Colts want to run play action. The Chiefs' biggest obstacle for next week is the fact that they can't get happy getting into a shootout. And I know they'll want to think that they can outscore anyone, but realistically, if the Chiefs want to be serious about winning a Super Bowl this year, it's about ball control and managing the clock and not putting your defense in a position to fail. Because if you give Andrew Luck more possessions and more plays to run against the Chiefs' defense, that is the path to victory for the Colts. They have to kind of get more possession of the football. So getting into a shootout plays into the Colts' hands. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Chiefs should be able to win next week. But again, I have no confidence in Andy Reid. So I want to see what that line ends up being at for the Colts. Because to me, that's one of the more interesting plays that we could end up seeing the Colts in the AFC title game because of a classic Andy Reid blunder in the postseason. All right, so in the nightcap, we had the Cowboys defeat the Seahawks 24-22. Basically, this was a strange one because the long and short of it is that Seattle lost their kicker, Sebastian Janikowski, at the end of the first half due to a pulled hamstring after trying to attempt a 57-yard field goal. And at that point, the Seahawks basically screwed themselves because this was a game where it was always going to be a defensive struggle. I talked about that before. I expected the under to hit, but because Janikowski was out of the game, so without Seabass, Seattle was stuck in a position where they had to keep going for it. And I give credit to Russell Wilson for keeping that game as close as it was because the Cowboys defense shut down the Seattle running game completely. Chris Carson was a non-factor. Seattle couldn't do anything running the football, and realistically, there wasn't anything that Seattle could have done outside of force some turnovers because, again, offensively, the Seahawks are pretty limited overall in terms of what they can do because, outside of getting a couple of deep pass plays, you're not going to get that many chances to take care of business. And, yes, Dak Prescott threw a pick, but realistically, Seattle needed to win that turnover battle decisively. They just did not get enough in the way of changing field position, just changing the mindset. Because again, from the long and short of it, like outside of the one sack Frank Clark had, there really wasn't that many. There wasn't that much pressure on Dak Prescott. There were 4 QB hits the entire game. That's not a lot. Realistically, Seattle needed a little bit more from their defense. They didn't play bad. They just didn't play great. And, when those sort of things happen, I mean, that's just kind of the way it breaks down. In order to win a road playoff game, you got to do just a little bit more than what we got out of Seattle. And yes, they had a bad break with Seabass going down with the pulled hamstring, but at the end of the day, it's an unforgiving business at times, and Seattle just didn't do enough. And that was my whole concern about Seattle in the first place, was I didn't see enough in the tank with this Seahawks team to make a difference. And, I would say one of the things that Seattle's going to have to kind of explore in the offseason, this was more of a rebuilding year for Seattle anyway, but I just think that they need to get a little bit more dynamic on offense. Maybe like get another pass catcher that's more reliable, because, again, Doug Baldwin's getting up there in age, and with his injuries this year, it made it more apparent that Seattle truly needs, like, if Baldwin, because Baldwin just turned dirty, so it's one of those where you have to start thinking who's going to become the number one receiver on that squad going forward. I don't think it's Lockett. I think Lockett's still more of a change of pace guy. Would be suitable as a number 2, but not a number 1 guy. And, if you bring back Baldwin, maybe you got to figure out, do we try to go down the route of getting another dynamic tight end again, even though Jimmy Graham didn't pan out? Something on Seattle's got to change. It's just that offense is just too limited, and they don't have any game changers in the running back position. Like, the offensive line has to be dominant for that running game to truly take over games. Just because, again, Rashad Penny, maybe he's the guy down the road, but outside of that one run he had, he was a non-factor. And as I said, Chris Carson couldn't get anything going at all last night. So we'll see how Dallas looks moving forward. The fact of the matter is, we don't know in terms of who Dallas is going to be playing next week. It could be the Rams. It could end up being that they go up against the Saints, but we'll see. We'll see how the Bears game goes. But Dallas did just enough to win. Nothing too impressive. The defense did their thing, and the offense kind of stayed out of the way and didn't muck up the process by making critical turnovers on their own end of the field. Really. So that's pretty much it for the game itself. But let's get into the Sunday matchups, because we're running a little low on time here. But in terms of the matchups today, again, I talked about this. The Chargers traveling for a 1 o'clock game is just criminal when you really think about it. Like, the NFL really screwed the Chargers here. I think the Chargers are the better team, and the fact that they've played actually helps the Chargers, in my opinion, just be prepared for Baltimore's offense. So I think this is going to be low scoring. Realistically, this game comes down to, can Phillip Rivers not force the ball into bad situations trying to make something happen? Can Phillip Rivers just be patient and let the game develop? That's the biggest thing, because the last time they faced 3 weeks ago, you had Melvin Gordon held to less than 4 yards a carry and just could not get the ball moving at all and couldn't break one. The Baltimore was very disciplined. To be honest, Los Angeles has to be more careful in terms of how they manage the offense. So the Chargers have to stay patient, and they can't force the issue. Forcing the issue, that's going to be an automatic L. I will say that outright. Even though the Ravens don't force that many turnovers, when they do get opportunities, they will make you pay, and the Chargers cannot fall into that trap. So Phillip Rivers got to behave himself, and they're going to need a big-time performance out of Melvin Gordon. But we'll see how the game goes. In terms of fantasy impact for players, I really think about what you would get out of Melvin Gordon here. To me, this is not any, as I said before, it's not a cash game play today. I just don't like cash tournaments at all. I think this is a GPP, and you lead the cash games well, basically you junk the cash games for the rest of the postseason, to be honest, because, again, with limited slates, it's harder to get advantage on teams, so you're better off just playing your tournaments than anything else. But going through this again, I just have to say that if you're doing anything out of cash, then you can go with Lamar Jackson, but for the Ravens. But I'm not big on cash games this week, so or the rest of the postseason. As I said, it's just one of those where we're gonna have to take a pass. In terms of the wide receivers, again, I'm not big on wide receivers this week. I just think that this is going to be a low-scoring game. Keenan Allen will look to bounce back because he got hurt last time out against the Ravens. But I don't see a whole lot coming out of the passing game. That's why I say Phillip Rivers is just going to have to learn to be patient here and not force the issue. If he forces the issue, then he's going to put his teammates in a bad spot, because I can easily see it going sideways for them if they don't manage it correctly. But outside of that, I really don't like a whole lot of the wide receivers. Maybe take a punt on Travis Benjamin, just because the Chargers might try to do some trick plays, and he seems to be more of the gadget type play receiver that they use for those sets. So that's really it. Outside of that, the defenses, either defense I'm comfortable with between the Ravens and Chargers, if you're not paying up top salary for the Bears defense. So moving on to the afternoon matchup, we got the Bears hosting the Eagles, and I talked about this before. The biggest thing I have an issue with the Bears is their play calling. Everyone keeps praising Matt Nagy, and I keep kind of scratching my head because I'm looking at him saying that in tight games, Nagy has shown the tendency to self-destruct, similar to what you see out of Andy Reid. So I'm not going to say that I'm sold on the Bears yet, because I've seen them just blow opportunities in the past this year. So the one thing I'll say about this is it sets up nicely for the Eagles to play their underdog narrative. But, and this is the big but, due to the injuries that the Bears have with their wide receiver core, and now the story is out that Trey Burton, the former Eagles tight end, who's now playing for the Bears, now the story is that, Trey Burton is questionable now with a groin injury. And, if Burton is not, getting at it this late in the week is never a good sign for a guy's viability. So I'm not going to have time to do a later swap today for the 4 o'clock games, but I have to look at this as a case where, realistically, there's a good chance Burton doesn't play, and so that makes paying up for Zach Ertz even more imperative. Downgrade the receivers where you have to, but paying up for Burton to me is just fool's gold at this point. You can't do it at this stage. It's just not a good play in my opinion at this stage of the game. With him being added to the injury report this late, it's almost never a good sign for a guy to be added on that late and for him to actually suit up and play. Because even if he's active, usually it means that they're limited at a capacity. That's why they had to list him on the injury report in the first place. So, not too keen on that. The Bears are favored by 5.5 points. Again, I don't trust the Bears offense enough to actually cover that line because when the Bears hold their opponents under 24 points, they are 12-0. When they score over 24 points, they're 0-4. Now, I say this because Philly is going to keep trying to stretch the ball down the field and keep throwing on the Bears. So this is either going to go one or two ways. Either Nick Foles is going to throw the Eagles out of the game completely, as I expect, or it's going to go where this ends up being a back-and-forth contest that the Bears end up dropping because they're just not suited to play these types of games, and Nagy ends up out overthinking it and screwing this up. Now, again, I don't say that this is a referendum on Nick Foles being good. No, Nick Foles is not a good quarterback. But in the system that they're playing, this is the only system he can play in to stretch the ball down the field and just keep taking shots. So, you can have any number of things with referee flags getting involved for illegal contact or pass interference. The Eagles are going to keep taking their shots down the field because, to me, that's the only way they can win this game. They're not going to be able to get it done running the football against the Bears defense. The only way to kind of get it done is just keep throwing the football at the Bears. The Bears are going to just try to get the pressure with the front four, let Khalil Mack do his thing. But the Eagles just have to trust that Nick Foles can at least put the ball in spots where his guys can get to it and make plays. So that's really what this game comes down to. So this could turn into a complete rout, or it's going to be back and forth in a tight one because the Bears are not able to outpace a team that's clicking on offense. So we'll see how it goes, but definitely some interesting scenarios that can play out today because I do see this as a case where the matchups dictate that it's going to be tight throughout the game. So I'm very much interested in seeing how the playoffs shape up, but there's a very real chance that all the teams that are playing today will be out of the playoffs by the end of next week. I'm just not sold on outside of the Chargers-Ravens game. I'm not, because the one thing that I had a fear about was if the winner of this game going into New England playing, because even though I felt that these were the two Super Bowl contenders, there usually is some difference about playing a grueling game today. So, again, I'm very curious to see how this game goes because if the Chargers or Ravens just go engage in a slugfest, I'm wondering about what they'll have left in the tank just because Melvin Gordon's banged up and Baltimore's style of play is not sustainable long-term for Lamar Jackson. So, very much curious to see how it all shakes out. But I'm going to leave it there for the show. It's only 2 games late, so you're pretty much left with a couple of dart throws. But as I said, I'm leaning more towards playing Trubisky in DFS just from the standpoint of the matchups against the Eagles secondary. He should have opportunities to get the ball down the field, whereas I do see a blowout potential for the Eagles. And yes, Nick Foles could make some plays down the field, but I also see turnovers from forcing the ball down the field if it comes to that. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm curious to see how the matchups end up panning out. I mean, as I said, I'll take the Chargers and the Eagles today on the spread, but in terms of outright game winners, I still think that you could have scenarios where both the Ravens and the Bears win. It's just one of those cases where both home teams have a good chance of holding on. I mean, you already had a home favorite go down in the Texans, but we'll see how it pans out for these two squads. But at least we got a little bit off the snide with the second game last night. Even though it wasn't a great game, it was still better than the direct that we got out of the Texans. But as I said, that's a separate story with Bill O'Brien and the Houston Texans being pretenders. But that's going to do it for the show. Best of luck to everyone, and have a good one.